And we will kick off. So hello and good morning, everyone. It's great to see you all again today. My name is Linda Manson and I'm the Policy and Project Manager at TVET Directors Australia, or TDA. Before I begin today's proceedings, I'd like to do an acknowledgement of country, which is something that we do in Australia, to pay our respects to the traditional owners of the land. In the spirit of reconciliation, TAFE Directors Australia acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respects to their elders past and present. After the launch of the series last week, I'm pleased to welcome you back again today for the second session in the series on the digital transformation of TVET through the sharing of best practices between Australia and Vietnam. The aim of the series is to share experiences of Australian TVET institutions in their digital transformation journey and to provide an opportunity for dialogue and exchange between Australia and Vietnam. I would like to acknowledge the presence today of a number of TVET officials, as well as leaders and trainers from 44 colleges from across Vietnam. Welcome to you all and thank you for joining us today. I would also like to acknowledge the ongoing support from the education team at the Australian Embassy in Vietnam and the interpreters who are joining us today. So the topic of today's webinar is organisational transition to online TVET delivery. We have two Australian speakers who will share their different experiences and insights. Can you all still hear me? Is that going okay? Also, just a reminder that after this week, we will have 5 more sessions covering a number of different topics in detail, which we'll explore week by week. These topics include the design and production of learning material suitable for online TVET, using new technologies for TVET course delivery in trades, building trainer capability for online course design and delivery, how to support and engage students in an online environment, and how to assess skills through online learning. So I think Leha from the Embassy was going to put some information in the chat box about the upcoming topics, just so everyone knows what is coming up. In terms of how today's session will run, we will start with our 2 keynote presentations. Firstly, we'll hear from Alyssa McKenzie from the Royal Melbourne Institute of Technology, or RMIT, who will share what RMIT learned about their institutional transition to online delivery as a result of their COVID experience. Alyssa will be followed by Michael Dean from Southwest TAFE. He will be looking at his institution's digital transition in the slightly different context of a smaller regional provider. We will end today's webinar with a question and answer session of approximately 30 minutes to allow Vietnamese participants to ask questions and engage with the Australian speakers. But before we begin the presentations, I'd just like to remind you of a few housekeeping rules. So simultaneous interpretation is provided. You just need to click on the interpretation button and choose the Vietnamese or English channel as appropriate. Please try and ensure that your microphones are on mute if you're not speaking. Please feel free to put any questions you may have in the chat box during the webinar, and you're welcome to ask your questions in Vietnamese, and Leha will help us out with the translations when we get to the Q&A session. If you wish to speak during the Q&A session, please raise your hand virtually, introduce yourself, and ensure that both your camera and microphone are switched on while you're speaking. Finally, please note that this webinar is being recorded and by participating today, you are giving your consent for TDA to record the event. So I'd now like to introduce our first speaker for today. Alyssa McKenzie is an educational leader and innovator with over 15 years experience in the vet sector. She has worked as a teacher, administrator, learning designer, compliance officer and manager. For the last 4 years, Alyssa has worked at RMIT University, currently as the Associate Director of Learning Experience. At RMIT, Alyssa designed and implemented the Vocational Education Blended Learning Action Plan. She has developed teacher capability initiatives, and worked alongside teaching teams to reimagine programs and design digital courses. I will now pass the floor to Alyssa.
Thank you very much, Lyndall, and thank you for that lovely introduction. I'm just going to share my screen with you. Give me 2 seconds. And hopefully everybody can see that. So as Lyndall introduced, I am the Associate Director for Learning Experience at RMIT in the newly formed Vocational Education College. Throughout this presentation today, I'm going to take you on a bit of my journey through COVID and the work that my team and the broader teams at RMIT in our vocational education space did in response to COVID and our rapid transition, firstly to online learning and then into blended learning as the pandemic played out. At the time, last year, my role was actually as Manager Vocational Education Design. So I led a learning design team. And we worked quite closely with our teachers and our colleagues through this. And as COVID was playing out, our new college was also forming. So just to frame it, I will tell you a little bit about that journey as well. Before I progress too much further, I'd also like to just pause and acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land from which I am joining you today. Here in Melbourne, where I am, it is the people of the Woiwurrung and Boiwurrung language groups of the Eastern Kulin Nations. I would like to pay my respects to their elders past and present and extend our acknowledgement and respects to the traditional custodians of the lands and waters across Australia where RMIT conducts its business. So as I mentioned, we are a newly formed College of Vocational Education, so it's a very exciting time at RMIT with a strong focus on the value that vocational education brings. Our RMIT structures, and I've put this slide in just so you can get a little bit of context around the type of programs that we were trying to transition during the COVID piece. We are currently now grouped into 5 industry clusters. And these include our creative industries, where we have fashion and textiles, arts programs, screen and media, sound, music, and a variety of programs ranging predominantly sort of in the certificate 4 to associate degree levels. We have our built environment and sustainability cluster, where we have a number of trades programs, including our apprenticeship programs in plumbing, electrical, building, carpentry, and those sorts of programs. We also have building design and advanced diplomas and associate degrees in that space. In our future technologies cluster, we have our engineering programs, IT programs, I4.0 programs, so advanced manufacturing and some of those initiatives. And in our business and enterprise cluster, we range from anything from an associate degree in legal to sort of traineeship programs in Microsoft and some of those sorts of technologies. And in our social care and health programs, we cover quite a broad range of programs, including aged care, disability, nursing is a very large program for us, most of those community services programs, and also our training and assessment, interpreting, and a number of other programs. So the reason I'm providing you with this information is just so you can understand the breadth of programs that we had to transition to online during COVID. Last year when COVID hit, our structure was quite different. We were operating with 3 vocational schools that sat within 3 different colleges, and the governance structures and systems that they had were a little bit different and quite diverse. So bringing them together this year has helped us quite a lot. But in saying that, we had very committed teaching workforce and some great educators, which helped us along the way. So this sort of shows you, there was a lot of variation in the nature of the cohorts we worked with, the style of our programs, how practical they were, and some of those sorts of things. So COVID, it came. It was unexpected in the beginning, and it certainly took us all by surprise. Most of us have never lived through anything like a global pandemic, and we really had no idea what to expect. The university was already starting to do some work early in 2020, particularly in relation to international students and students not being able to come to Australia, and starting to think about what that would look like. At that point, we weren't sure that it was going to hit us, but then of course it did. And on the 23rd of March 2020, we had to make the heartbreaking decision as a university to shut our campuses, in line, of course, with government recommendations and advice. That meant that all of our programs had to transition to purely online delivery And not only did our programs have to transition, but our administrative supports, our student supports, and everything else that we deliver had to transition. So obviously there was a lot of impact, and this caused quite a lot of need to rethink and reimagine the way we approached our work, and caused a lot of stress. And we had 1 week from a shutdown to actually reimagine our programs with the view of trying to reopen as many programs as we possibly could in an online environment. And I'm going to take you through that journey and how we approached that. Firstly, though, it was pretty successful. So we had, out of our 180 programs, 67 of those were able to continue through the rest of the year in a purely online format. Others obviously could continue, and I'll take you through that journey in a minute, but I had to transition and incorporate some blended learning elements. We were able to provide tailored supports to help our teachers along the way, and I'll explain how we did that to you today as well. And we developed online learning guidelines for best practice, which really then helped us to ensure that we were still giving valuable learning experience to our students. The one thing that we were very, very keen to avoid was to reduce the quality of the educational experience and the outcomes for our students as a result of this COVID and the move to online learning. We also held our very first VE Learning and Teaching conference in-house, which was purely for our VET practitioners around blended learning and online during the pandemic. And we provided one-to-one support, which is the work that my team led. So how? The first thing we really had to decide when COVID hit was what programs could continue online very quickly and which programs needed support. We had a rather small support team, and we won't be able to put a learning designer in to work alongside every single teacher for every single course and every single program. So we had a rapid piece of work that our team supported our program managers to analyse our courses and their readiness and preparedness for online learning. And that enabled us to put our courses into essentially 3 buckets. And those buckets were courses that could transition very, very quickly and without a lot of support, and they were ready to go. Courses that needed support because of the complexities of the nature of their programs. Perhaps they were incredibly practical, or they had cohorts that needed additional supports. So we had to look at those in more detail. And then there were, unfortunately, 1 or 2 programs where it was deemed unsuitable to transition them to online, purely for those reasons. They were highly practical in nature, and they had cohorts that required a lot of support in a face-to-face environment, which was not possible to transition. At this point, thankfully, there was only, I think, 2. So the number of those programs was incredibly small. Those programs that were able to transition either with support or on their own, they then created an action plan. So each program wrote and designed its own action plan to explain how it would go forward. And we started to project ahead, looking at how far into the future could they realistically continue in an online environment before it started to have too larger impact on our students. As I said, making sure the student had a valuable learning experience and was able to achieve the outcomes that they'd joined us to achieve was absolutely still high priority. So to work through those action plans and to bring them to life, our teachers needed support. So we offered one-to-one support to many of our teaching staff, providing elbow support to help them transition their courses to an online environment. We also collaborated with other learning and teaching staff and encouraged our teachers to come together so that they could support each other, and connected our teachers into broader supports across the university with our central teams, ITS, and some of those departments. And we provided guidance to them around selecting videos, content, materials to help improve their online presence and to really make sure that they were getting ahead. And we started to then redesign our templates to make them more user-friendly for an online environment. We also provided a range of blended learning and online learning options. So we started to run some PD activities that our teachers could drop into. We held regular drop-in sessions once a week where teachers could come in with any problem that they had and talk to us about what their challenges were and help solution as a group, so that all of those teachers could learn from that shared experience. And we ran courses on some technologies like Flipgrid, using video editing tools and some of those that would help engage the students and enhance the learning and make it a better experience for those students and more interactive. I mentioned earlier that quality, or I mentioned several times actually, that quality of our learning experience was really, really important to us. So one of the things that our central teams did, and we then contextualized to vocational education, is set some university standards around what does high quality learning experiences in online learning look like, and what do we expect that every single course should have to ensure that the student is going to get the most out of that course. So we looked at things like content, reading activities, learning activities, and assessments, making sure that there was clear instruction and information for students so that they could navigate through our LMS and through their courses and have the information that they needed to complete those assessment tasks, and also have the opportunity to engage with their peers, engage with their teachers, and to trial things throughout their learning experience. And we actually assessed all of our courses against those criteria. So once we sent our benchmarks, we spent quite a lot of time going through all of our courses and checking a week in times of their delivery so that we could then provide feedback to those teachers around how they were stacking up against those criteria, where they were meeting the criteria, and where perhaps they should attend some professional development or work with one of our learning designers to improve their courses. And that was quite an eye-opener for many of our teachers, because it gave them some direct personal feedback on their course and ways to improve. And it was all very much in a supportive manner, with a view of, we know you're struggling, we know this has happened really, really quickly, but here's some hints and tips and ways that you could improve your course so that your student can work forward. And that was received really, really well. One of the biggest changes for us, which occurred probably around, I can't remember the exact timeline, but about April, May, I think early May, was that we were given the opportunity to return some of our students to campus able to start some blended learning and to do some practical activity on campus. So this was a change that happened in part of our government directives and also through our university channels with our management team. It was a huge undertaking to be able to bring students back on campus. It's not like we could just open the doors and say, here you go. We had to ensure safety of our staff, safety of our students. And so there was enormous amounts of risk assessment work, and even things that you don't think of. So, you know, can we sort of have enough toilet facilities and things so that people are not getting in each other's way? Things can be deep cleaned. How many students are coming in at once? How much time is there between students coming in so that we can deep clean all of the equipment, sterilize everything, make sure that we're not transmitting any infections. And it was quite a big undertaking, but it was incredibly important for us. So our trades and nursing students were the first students in our whole university to come back onto campus to start to do some practical activity. And the reason those programs were allowed was because they were deemed essential services. So those were connected to workers and workforces that were needing to continue here. And so we were able to progress those students, which was a great relief, considering that most of our trade students are apprentices and their employers were relying on this training. And also our nurses were needing to go out and do work placements and needing to be out there, and the nurses around Melbourne were asking for more nurses to be coming in. So it was an incredibly important piece of work and very well considered, and it gave our students some great outcomes because it meant that they were able to progress with activities that they might not have been able to do otherwise. And that's where we started to move forward. So that then became an introduction into what blended learning could look like more at scale. And that's where we looked more then at how we can progress forward with blended delivery online where possible, because obviously we still didn't know when COVID was going to end or when we would be back on campus. And as we know from this year's experience, it's still a little bit up and down. And if you're not sure, we weren't aware, Melbourne's back in lockdown at the moment. So we're predominantly offline, working remotely at the moment. So to get our blended learning, most of our courses were delivered through Microsoft Teams, Echo 360 and Collaborate Ultra. We were able to have most of our content and the sort of navigation of our courses through Canvas and encouraging engagement so that students could interact with their teachers and their peers through the LMS and through a range of platforms. And before I sort of take you further into where we've gone to now, what I wanted to do is just spend a little bit of time actually showing you some of the content and some of the courses and the approaches from a really learning design course perspective that we used as a way of helping our students learn. So content, as I mentioned, was critical, and content for a vocational education student can mean a lot of things. And while we had a lot of links to websites, articles, readings, content of that sort of nature and text in the LMS, we also wanted to break it up. We know that a lot of our learners don't necessarily want to read lengthy academic type articles. They're vocational learners. It's a very different thing. And we wanted to make sure that the sorts of information that we were presenting to them replicated that workplace experience. Our students should be receiving the sorts of documents in their LMS that they see in their workplaces, so that we can make sure that we're connecting the two. So we used a lot of infographics, we used a lot of activities that linked into the types of information that students would have to access in the workplace. So links to our WorkSafe articles or government sites, which you would expect that someone might want to access through their workplace. We created fictional ensamples of policies and procedures in PDF formats or other formats and fictional intranets that they could access information from. And we actually created some of those into hubs so that lots of students from different courses could connect into the same materials where there were similarities. We also used a lot of workplace scenario type videos where we played back what an actual scenario might look like. So the video that's got a snapshot there is actually a story of a aged care worker who is meeting with her supervisor because she needs to put in a report about something that's happened that didn't quite go right in the workplace. So we actually could play out a lot of those conversations through video so that our students could see examples of the types of things that they should be doing. Engagement is also critical. We know that most of our students like to learn through peer-to-peer interaction. And I think that slide might have gone a bit funny. I don't know if that's just my screen, but I will make sure these get sent out after. So if you're not seeing this clearly, we can do that. I'm not sure what's happened there. I apologize. But we had different ways that students could connect with each other, and we wanted to really encourage group and peer learning. We know that students like to do that, and our students actually created a lot of their own channels, which was quite interesting in ways of connecting through social media or other engagement channels. We tried to create it. So this first video you're looking at is actually a video around diversity where we've got students that we'd filmed previously, just talking about different things that they like. So what foods they like, what colors, what jobs they want to do when they're older. And then that's to start a conversation around people's independent thoughts and thinkings and preferences. And then that can lead into further discussions. And that video was actually quite successful and those conversations were really engaging. We also had little ones where students were given a workplace task that they had to do, and then they were encouraged to post their results around those tasks so that they could share and comment on each other's work, like each other's work, and give each other peer feedback. So those sort of mechanisms work quite well from a more static point of view. And then of course we use things like breakout rooms and sort of those sorts of things for in-class group work. And our students found that really, really useful because they were able then to support each other and work directly with each other to help keep motivation, which was incredibly important during a pandemic when some of our students were struggling to be motivated and to keep working together. And the other key thing is practice. So our students needed to have the opportunity to practice their knowledge and to practice their skills. And once we've moved into an online environment, it's a little bit more challenging. So normally they would talk these things through in the classroom or, practice a task, use equipment, use machinery. And of course, we still need to have those things. We can't take away from it, but to keep the interaction going, we had a lot of H5P based activities where students could drag and drop, check their knowledge, try it again, have safe failures and keep practicing, practice quizzes, have a go type activities, particularly important for some of our workers and apprentices that could still go to work. So we could encourage them to think about things on the job, to ask their supervisor, to try things, and then to bring that back to the class so they could still keep some of that practical learning going, even if they couldn't do it at TAFE. So towards the end of last year, with all of this in mind, I undertook a piece of work with some of the brilliant teachers and learning designers in my team to start to evaluate what our experience had been like, where our successes were with it, and of course, where our challenges were. We knew that it was something that had happened very quickly and overnight, but we also knew that it had progressed blended learning and online learning very, very rapidly in a way that we probably wouldn't have seen if we hadn't have been forced to because of the pandemic. So we conducted research, and we had a survey that went out to our teaching staff that had around 150 respondents. We ran 6 different focus groups with the associate deans and program managers in a variety of the program areas across all of our offerings. And we also held in-depth interviews with 6 program managers from very, very diverse program areas. And then we did a complete data review. So there were a number of student surveys that went out throughout the pandemic, checking, as well as our normal student surveys, just checking student engagement, student experience, and providing feedback. So we spent a lot of time analysing those so that we could get a really good sense of where our students were at and what they had and hadn't enjoyed and what the teaching experience was like. So I'm going to share some of those findings with you, just sort of in an overview, and also what we're doing now based on those findings and based on our experience of COVID. So the benefits that we found with moving to remote delivery, flexibility, travel time stand out there, which is hardly surprising. Quite a lot of our students enjoyed joining in their pajamas, as did some of our teachers and perhaps me sometimes too. Not having to commute to work or to school every day, it did actually make it a bit easier. And I remember one student telling me that she was a young mother. And so for her, not having to drop her son to childcare and being able to do some of these things remotely made things a lot easier for her, and it meant that she could be a lot more flexible in that space. And there were a number of other reasons as well, particularly in the pandemic. A lot of our students were casual workers, and so for them, being able to pick up shifts and then be able to pick up their learning at a different time and be a little bit more flexible in that, particularly when work was scarce for a lot of them, it was much easier for them. Many actually enjoyed the sort of self-paced learning and the recordings, and that being able to review more. So if you miss something in class, being able to have it in a recorded thing that you can play it back, watch it a number of times, that was really important. And interestingly, we actually had some of our courses found that their student attendance and engagement came up and actually uplifted in the online environment. Of course, there were challenges. Teacher workloads, mental health, these stand out here, which is really not surprising considering we were in the midst of a global pandemic. There was a lot of fear. Nobody knew what was going to happen with a pandemic. People were worried about their health, the health of their family and their loved ones. And as I mentioned earlier, in the very first instance, we were given a week to transition all of our courses to online. So to have to reinvent all of your delivery that you may have been doing for many years in a week's time is, it's not surprising that people felt the pressure from that. And we've been looking at how we can support those teachers in the future to make sure that we can do this in a much more sustainable way. Assessment authentication is one that comes up all the time, and I'm sure that other institutions would have experienced that as well. And obviously, preparation time, the practical assessment is a really big one, and access to technology and bandwidth and connectivity issues, challenges of students having to connect from their bedrooms, or teachers even having to connect from parts of that. And we really saw a lot of conversation start to play out around that whole blurring of the lines between your work life, your home life, your student life versus your home life, because all of a sudden your family is walking around in the background and you're on display. So, and most teachers, I had a few teachers, one would say, I'd never invite my students over to my house, but all of a sudden they're in my living room. So there were a lot of those sorts of challenges for people to play through and to really think about how we could manage that better. So through all of our analysis, the one thing that did shine through was these 4 keys. So we asked our teachers and some of our program managers, what were the key ingredients that made online learning successful? And this is what they came up with. So these were their words. So we had creativity, and this was really aligned to things like rethinking the timetable. A lot of people in the very first instance did try and transition their courses from exactly what they were doing face-to-face to the online environment and just lift and shift it. It didn't work. We had to do it differently. We had to think about the timings and some of those. not surprisingly, a lot of students didn't want to spend 6 hours online with a teacher. They really wanted to do that in a different way. So we had to think about shorter, more breaks, gaps in between classes, how we could break that up more. Team teaching was another one that came into that. So looking at how we could leverage and get groups together and use team teaching strategies to help navigate chat functions and things like that as well. And just really rethinking the way that we present the courses to the student. Empathy was another one, really thinking about how we connect and work with our, how we connect and work with our students. What's the role of a teacher in this environment? That role really, really changes. And also, what's the role of the student? So we had to rethink some of those. Collaboration and connection was, of course, incredibly important. So one of the big successes that we found online is it really opened our doors to bringing more industry into the classroom. And when we try and bring industry on site at RMIT, they have to navigate city traffic, they have to travel to the campus, they have to find a car park. If they do, good luck, or public transport. And so it just created extra layers of barrier. But where we were online, we could go global. So we were able to bring in industry representatives from around the world to speak directly to our students. And that was really valuable and something that we're looking to maintain. And we found some classes really worked well too when they rethought about their timings of their classes and were able to spend some extra time connecting indirectly with students. So instead of having some of that time spent presenting content, they could pre-record that and then use time to connect one-to-one to students and check how they were going, or to check in with small groups of students. And the other one's engagement. So we need to make sure that the learning activities and the types of ways that we're connecting, that we're leveraging those peer learning opportunities, and that we're really making sure that we're giving students a chance to engage with each other, with the content, with their practice, with their assessments, and those sorts of things. So once we had these keys, we decided to overlay them with a human-centered design model. And this is what has now formed the basis of some of our work and where we're going. So we took that sort of human design model and we put it around to say that if we really truly want to progress with blended learning as an institution, we have to look at it holistically through each of these elements. And if we work through those keys, we really need to work through that cycle of thinking about what are the roles of our faculty, what are the roles of our students, and how do we bring them together? How do we structure our courses, rethink our program designs, rethink our timetables, and look at that engagement levels and the way that we're connecting those? How do we connect to our workplace learning activities and our will, and bring through all of the industry components, the peer learning components, and making sure that we connect all those together? And then, of course, moving more around into course design, program design, and then that evaluation. So how do we keep making sure that we're doing these the right way and bringing it through these cycles so that we're not leaving any of these parts out? That we're keeping on thinking about, do we have the right technology? Do we have the right strategies? Where can we go from here? How can we improve? And so taking all this in mind, we have developed and we implemented a blended learning action plan, which we put into place towards the end of last year with the hope of not losing the momentum. As I mentioned, we'd progressed blended and online learning so rapidly, so much faster than we'd been wanting to do. Blended learning and online learning wasn't new to us. We'd been working in this space for many, many years. I think I've been working in online learning since about 2006. And so it's not a new concept. But we saw rapid take up and we saw people starting to experiment. We saw people trying things they wouldn't normally try because they were forced to, but they also had a lot of successes in doing that. It wasn't easy. It was, of course, really, really hard. It was done under pressure, under really trying circumstances because of the pandemic, but there were some absolutely great successes in doing that that we wanted to carry forward. And so we've started these initiatives which are carrying forward. So we're looking at that redesign of programs holistically at the program or qualification level to look at, do we have the right mix for blended learning? Blended learning might mean that some units are delivered online while some are delivered more in the classroom. or it might mean that there's a flipped model applied throughout. We might look at how we do more workplace assessment, or how the assessments are conducted and what needs to be online versus offline, and some of those sorts of activities. And so it's starting to look at that holistic strategies. And so we've trialed revamping some programs holistically around those blended learning models, so we can start to look at that feedback. We've also started reviewing our technology roadmap to make sure that we do have the right technologies going forward. And not just that we have the right technologies, that people understand what the technologies actually do. That was an interesting thing that we found during COVID, was some people would come to our team, because we were the learning design team, and say, we want to do X, Y, and Z because we can't do it and the LMS doesn't do it and we need to go buy a new technology. And when we broke it down, quite often it wasn't actually a technological solution they were looking for. It was actually a learning redesign solution, or our existing technology did do it, they just weren't aware of it. So we want to look at some preferences around what are our preferred ways of using the technologies we do have, and where we do have genuine gaps that we need to investigate and move forward on. We also need to build capability. Digital literacy became an issue, which is not surprising to everyone. So we've been working on strategies around improving digital literacy, both within our student cohorts in some areas where they did struggle a little bit, and also within our teaching workforce, and looking at where do we want them to go. And it's, in fairness, you know, if you've worked in a career that hasn't required a lot of digital technology and all of a sudden you're asked to design an e-learning course, it is a big gap. You know, if you're asked to create videos and edit them and you've never worked in that space before, that can be quite confronting. Many have taken on the challenge in a great way, but we're looking at how can we build those skills in our teachers to help them to be able to do these things with comfort and ease, so it's not a challenge for them. We're also looking at digital first assessment strategies. So we did find, even with our practical assessments, some of them didn't necessarily use technology as a way of recording evidence and to looking at those sorts of things. So we're really looking at redesigning our templates around some of those digital strategies to make it easier for teachers to use our LMS around assessment, and also to record the evidence and to make sure that we can keep all of the data that we need to keep, being a TAFE institution. We're looking at rich content and ways of sharing. And that was one of the things that our teachers said really strongly that they needed. They found it hard to source good quality content. And where we did create it, we tended to create it one at a time. So we would create it for this course, or we'd create it for this course and this course. What we needed to do is look at how do we share that? If someone creates a really great video, how do we make sure anyone else that might be using it? Workplace safety is a great example of that. In our programs, most courses have some aspects of workplace safety. And yes, it needs to be very strongly contextualized to the industry it's working in, but some of the principles are the same. The hierarchy of controls is the hierarchy of controls, but the examples might be different. So we needed to look at, you know, is there content that we could share across everyone, or maybe just health content that could be shared in health programs, and how do we share some of those things and build on it collectively? And finally, we just needed to look at some better introductory material for our students. So we did find that some students struggled a little bit to navigate the online environment and the learning environment. So if we had some clearer instructions around how to, you know, work through the LMS, how to find the things you need and how to get the right help, then that would make things a little bit easier. It didn't help that when you move to an online environment, all of the help functions are also online. So it makes it an even further barrier and more challenging to some of our students who find that hard to navigate. So that's where we're heading now. And this work is very much continuing within our College of VE. We've seen some tremendous initiatives and some really great outcomes, some really fantastic student stories around the successes that they've felt. And we had some feedback from our students. Obviously, it hasn't all been glory days. There's been many, many students who would just prefer to be back on campus doing the practical learning as soon as they possibly can. And we're obviously doing the best we can to make that happen. But there is definitely enough evidence to suggest that our students want hybrid. They want that blended methodology. They want the flexibility to go back and watch a video if they have the opportunity to do that, you know, or watch a demonstration of what might have been occurred in class if they need to follow up and to work through that. So that's not surprising, it's not new research. This has been around for quite some time, but it's definitely underpinning where we're going. And one of the things that one of my students said to us that I thought was really telling, and I'm going to end with, is that they felt that despite everything and despite the challenges, the one thing they've got from COVID is resilience. And I remember her exact quote is, now that we've been through this, I think we can go out in the world and do anything. And I think that's a really great way to wrap up, because I 100% agree that the students that have had to adapt and show that resilience and agility are going to be very well equipped for the workplaces of the future. Thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you, Alyssa. That was a really interesting presentation. I think we'll probably just move into the next speaker now, and we'll do the Q&A session at the end. Hopefully we'll have some questions, although I do see a hand up. If there's someone that would like to ask a question now, do you think that's okay if we do some questions now, Leha, or would you prefer to keep them for the end of the session?
I think we should keep it to the end of the session.
Okay, all right, great.
We're going to put it in the chat box now so people can start having questions in the chat box.
Great. Okay, thank you. So I would like to introduce our second speaker for today, Michael Dean. So Michael has worked in education since 2001, and he holds a master's degree in education. Michael's passion for educating began when he lectured at the University of Ballarat while starting his IT consulting business. For the last 5 years, Michael has worked at Southwest TAFE in regional Victoria, and has been the manager of digital innovation and the chief information officer since 2017. So the key motivation for Michael is to be able to provide access to education for students to change their trajectory in life, the same way that education gave him those opportunities. So over to you, Michael.
Thank you, Lyndall, and thank you to the TDA and to hi to everyone in Vietnam. Beautiful country, and it's one of my favourite places to go when we used to be able to travel. We remember those days, don't we? I'll always remember come on as hello. So fantastic. Look, I'd like to start like everyone else here and acknowledge the lands of our traditional owners here, which is the Gunda Jamara and Peak Wurrung people, and pay respects to elders past, present and emerging. We do exist down here in Southwest Victoria on a very, very large ancient First Nations area, so and across many communities. So we're very proud of that heritage. So what I thought I would talk about today is a little bit about Southwest TAFE and our journey. And it really does, there's so much that aligns with the COVID pandemic and the way we are finding ourselves having to teach these days. And Alyssa spoke really eloquently and beautifully about a lot of the same challenges that we have faced ourselves and we will continue to face as we move forward. So my approach to this is transitioning to digital platforms for engagement and sustainability. So for an institute like ours, and I'll take you through how that works for us. So about Southwest TAFE, we're located in the southwest of the east part of Australia, around about 300 kilometres from Melbourne. We're pretty remote. Our area is called the Great South Coast, and it's just absolutely beautiful. And I'm fortunate enough that I grew up 100 kilometres from here, and it's been a beautiful way to come home and help our students. We have 11% of the size of our state of Victoria, of the ground, but we do train outside that. We have only 1.7% of the whole population of Victoria, with Warrnambool being the largest regional town in our area with about 33,000 people. We have 7 teaching sites, which range from our bigger campuses such as Warrnambool and Portland and Hamilton, to very, very small campuses such as Colac, a beautiful historic campus called Glenormiston, and we also have a industry training centre in Stawell, which is out of our area. So about our people in our area, which is what has driven our need for digital change. We have a lot of people that don't have a high income in Southwest Victoria in the Great South Coast region. We are really overrepresented in low household earnings. We also have restricted access to fast internet, and when it is available, it is not very affordable. So our population is what we call digital poverty. Our regional and remote students in our area are really overrepresented in terms of their socioeconomic status and their backgrounds. And that means that a lot of them don't complete high school and they don't apply for higher education. And what we see is that we are overrepresented against the state averages for high school completions and for aspirations of going on to further study. And there are a lot of factors that really come into to this, to this situation that we had to address as an education provider. And just to look back on that, we have about 180 courses, and a lot of those are trade-based, so plumbing, building, and some of our other bigger courses are education for students who don't attend traditional schools, and also a lot of the care courses like nursing, individual support, disability support, and things like that. So we have quite a range of courses. And then, of course, we have all of those people dotted all around the place. And there's not enough for us to make a course. So what happens is that our students, they don't study because we can't run the course and they can't afford to travel. There was no way of them doing it from their town. So they either had to leave home, and they, in Australia, a lot of the times when the kids go to the cities, they don't come back. And then, or otherwise they stay and they work on the family farm and they never go and get another qualification. So it's quite hard for us. That means that because our population, because everyone is so far around the place, students might not be able to actually get to the campus we run the course on. That, we don't have the teachers in those locations to deliver those courses, and that having teachers travel makes the cost of delivering the courses really expensive, and it's a lot of time, and it's very dangerous out here in the regions with a lot of accidents and a lot of wildlife. And our two closest campuses are over 100 kilometres away from Warrnambool, so we have big travel times each way. We had a limited access to really good industry speakers and guest speakers and product experts in their field to come in and deliver in our programs. And because of all of this, all of our campuses ran as their own little communities. No one was really talking with each other and connecting and sharing information as if we were one big, happy organization. And the students in on those campuses, they never ever met or interacted with students from the other campuses. So it was a little isolating for those students. All right, I'll just jump in. So what do we need to do? We started with a set of really guiding principles that we needed to get to. So any digital transformation, you've got to have some goals. You've got to have some things that are non-negotiable, some marks you have to hit. So we developed a key set of principles here that it needed to achieve. And I've highlighted those, really in the story to this point. And that is that we needed to expand access to study options for students in our region. We needed to digitally reduce the distance between campuses and aggregate smaller student groups. So we couldn't make one group of 16 or 18 students in a subject, but we might have had 6 students there, 4 students there, 7 over there, and 4 over there. And we put them all together, and all of a sudden we have a course. We weren't able to do that. So those students would have had to have traveled to where the teacher was, and they can't really afford to travel, or they don't want to travel. So we wouldn't have run the course at all. So we wanted to be able to run more courses. We wanted to create an environment with technology that made you feel like you were part of something. It had to be collaborative. It had to be engaging, and the products that we used and the things that we did and the way in we teach had to be better. We needed to provide spaces that we could teach in that were really designed for teaching. And some of those were classrooms, some were rooms, others were things like, platforms that were completely virtual classrooms where the teacher could have breakouts and things like that. And we had to make sure that operating the technology, operating the systems, it didn't negatively impact the teaching. We needed our teachers to do the best thing that they could do. And, they are great teachers. They're not technology people. We had to let them, give them the freedom to still be the amazing teachers they could be. We just had to do it a little bit differently because it had to allow engagement in learning. And even further at our institute, it had to allow engagement with each other. And this is going back way before we even had COVID and we had the situation we were building. So you can see that we were setting ourselves up as a business to really help our students. So how do you bring that together? For me, I'm the manager of digital innovation and the CIO. I'm entrusted with the IT team to make sure that the IT products and services are delivered to the business and to the students. I'm also in charge of the vision and the tooling up of getting the business efficient and running online, and getting the teachers trained up as educators, because I'm a teacher myself. I was a teacher in IT, and I needed to bring those skills into the organization. It would be very easy for me to say, this is what you're going to do. But all of the institute, from your CEO to your students on the ground to your cleaning staff, they all need to be a part of the vision. They all need to put it together. Otherwise, you can't deliver that vision. So how does it come together for us and for Southwest TAFE and for other institutes? If you're going to do this, you really need a great relationship between these three different types of teams at least. And for us, of course, the teaching teams who deliver the education need to be engaged. They need to be comfortable. They need to feel part of what we're doing. They need to believe in it, just like we do. If you don't believe in it, then the students won't believe in it. And that will be very disappointing. The IT team has to be really, really involved in making sure that what you're bringing and what we're bringing suits the teaching and the students, and it's easy and it's simple and that it's supported. And your innovation teams, they could be your learning design teams, very similar to Alyssa. The teams that undertake that, they need to be involved because they will probably be doing the work to connect the teachers to the technology. Now, we're in such a small organization, those roles are all in one person really, and that's me. And it's a lot of time, but it's very rewarding. But as a result, we achieved a great level of success early on. And some of our programs that we were delivering before the pandemic struck were hair and beauty, makeup. And I'd sat in and watched and helped with some makeup courses that were all going on an online platform. You wouldn't think you could do that. Our childhood and early childhood care programs were running between our sites long before COVID. And we were implementing in our teacher training, in our training and assessment programs, we were teaching our students that were going to become TAFE teachers how to work in the online space, in the online world, knowing that that's what our organization needed and that's what you need to thrive. So we're really trying to make this part of our DNA when it goes to bringing these sorts of things in. And so that's what makes my role, I guess, unique. As an expert teacher, I was originally brought in to assist teachers and to do the work on bringing in some innovation in learning at the start of our journey. Now I make sure that not only are we going on that journey, that the technology that we're choosing matches what we want to do. And we also need to have a model within my role of making it easy for teachers to adapt and feel comfortable and feel loved and supported and also for the students to feel like they are important and that their experience really matters. And if we could hit those things, then we would be very happy with our progress. So what does it take, in my opinion, to make digital learning successful in our organisation? And Alyssa really did touch on this amazingly. So you can put all of Alyssa's content in here if you wanted to. And that is that there are two parts of the training that, to be a successful digital educator. And you need new teaching skills. You need to rethink the teaching and the design of the program from the ground up. You can't, as Alyssa put, and it was exactly what I used, you can't lift and shift your what you do in person to technology. And I'm not just talking about a type of technology like Moodle or your learning management system or video conferencing or your virtual classroom space or your blended space. You have to rethink it because students, they don't engage for very long periods of time. And I always say, them watching a teacher on video sometimes is like watching a really bad TV show with really bad actors. So you need to keep it short and engaging, and we need to work through. And I'll talk a little bit about how we did that. But of course, there's new technology skills too. And again, I'm really leaning on Alyssa's conversation that there was always, we need new this, or we need new tools, we need new software. A lot of the time we found that our teachers are only using about 10% of the capability of their software, and that there is studies in Australia that say that once people get to 15% of using a package, they will try to buy something else. So it's an interesting statistic. It's the hardware shop thing. You're doing a job in the backyard, you go to the hardware shop and you buy a new tool. It's bright and shiny, but we've already got tools that will do the job. So we needed to do that in our organisation because, like we said, teaching over technology is not the same as teaching in the class. And we started our migration or our training or our lead up no less than 6 weeks from the start of the course. That's not a lot of time to get through this content and to get people comfortable with what we're doing. You need to keep the students engaged. You need to keep your teachers engaged. You need to keep people engaged when you're in meetings as well. So you need to teach a whole new way of teaching. So what I did with my teachers and my staff and my all through the institute, have you studied online? Have you studied on a video conference? And what didn't you like about it? That was the first question. They all expected that they were going to come into the room and we were going to start playing with all this technology. And they were disappointed when we ended up with 3 whiteboards full of things. So they would say like, oh, it's boring, or I was disengaged, or I dropped out, or it was not for me. And what we did was we said, okay, so you need to come up with ways that you can stop doing this to your students. So all of your negative experiences that you've had, how would you go about not giving those to your students? And we have a little bit of a saying here. It's give skills, don't give scars. So we really want to do that. So learning design is the key. And what we're doing at Southwest TAFE, it doesn't matter if you're running an online course or you're doing a video conference or you're doing an in-class course. We believe that teacher capacity and teacher skills, they can be moved across all of these platforms seamlessly, and you'll end up being a better educator. And I particularly like the reference that Alyssa made. There is a book called Flip Your Learning that is, it's the best 3 or 4 hours reading you can give yourself if you want to try to make transition really successful. It gives you so many ideas. So when we got around to teaching the technical skills, teachers are going to be nervous if they're not digital natives. I'm 42 and I think that I'm pretty digitally literate and have adapted to new things, and they're quite exciting. Some of our teachers have been here since 1983, and they're very scared of technology. Some, though, are really into it and they see what it can do for the institute, for their course and for their students. So some of our best teachers in this space are not conventional. When you're delivering these skills though, you've got to make sure that they're really practical based. And as Alyssa said, but with good supporting documentation. So when they get scared or when they're by themselves and they're running this themselves, they can find something and get themselves on track within 30 or 40 seconds. So your training program should be very practical. You should do an activity, practice it again, add a new skill, practice that, and keep doing that. Keep getting the comfort down. With teachers, we pair them up and we get them to call each other using the platform or to run some test sessions with each other, and then to help each other with what they want to do. We give them a list of, now you need to share your presentation, now you need to run a poll, or now you need to do this, or now you need to do some breakout rooms. And we sit there and we help them, and we're there for them when they need it, because practice makes perfect. That's true in everything. So we base it on this thing called a constructivist theory. And that is, why do we train our teachers this way? Because we want our teachers to have a part in understanding, what's going on, why it works. And we want them to get a picture in their own head of how their learning will play out, how it will be built, and how it will be received by the students. And in the business too, through COVID, how their experiences that they're undertaking, their meetings and their engagements with their students, with their workmates, with their departments across all their campuses, what they're going to be like. So, when we see something new, we have to reconcile it within our own head and experience. We might have to change what we believe. I think Alyssa would probably agree that everyone says, my course can't be taught online, or my course cannot be taught on video conference. And the truth is that every course can have some of its content delivered. In our case, when we had to shut our campuses, like Alyssa, we moved our learning into the theory into the virtual space. And then when we were allowed, we were bringing apprentices in and trades in and doing and giving them their practical on site in the the engineering room or in the mechanics workshop or in the plumbing workshop. When we asked the students what they thought, they said, this is fantastic, because when I'm here all day with 40 other people and 2 teachers. But now there's only 3 of us. I'm here for 1 hour and I've got the teacher all to myself. So they were getting so much more teacher time. And that went back to our teachers, and our teachers were like, wow, this actually works. So they've started to rethink what education is going to look like. So this is what leads us into those first classes, the first time you are flying the aeroplane. How do you make sure that they're as successful as they can be? And this is where you're either going to succeed or fail. If as teachers, they always say, if you lose them on the first day, you've lost them all year. And I was a maths teacher in a high school, and yeah, that's so true. Okay, so we run a mentoring program. So we give our teachers the skills and we work with them together. It's like teaching a child to ride a bike. You don't just give them the bike and say, go and ride. You put them on training wheels and you give them a little push and you take the training wheels off, and you help them out and you catch them when they stop, and eventually they learn to stop, start and do all these things themselves. So we found that you need to be present with the teacher until they're comfortable. It is very resource intensive when you do this, but it has the best success. So we would set the classes up, and if it was Moodle and an online learning, we would put the content up with them and for them. If it was a video conference, we would book them. If it was an online teaching or a blended model, then we would set it up, the sequence up for the teacher with them. And in those first classes, we would ask how comfortable the teacher is in this environment, or the presenter or the manager. And we would we would say, okay, now you want to show a presentation, we will get that up. Now you want to change cameras or have a discussion, when, we will do it. And then we would eventually take back some of that control and give it to the teacher as they felt comfortable. You can always make, as an educator, make observations along the way to really get that class engaged and happy and happening and awesome. And you can do that through and go, I think it's time for you to switch this to this camera, or you should have a discussion. There's a lot of really cool ways, and the teachers are really, really receptive to working with you like that. We had to also remind teachers to do things and not to do things. So we needed to say to teachers, when you're asking questions, am I unmuted again? So when we're asking questions of the students, make sure you ask remote students, or when you're in a virtual space like in COVID, that you're giving students your attention and your time and your focus, just like we are here. It's really nice to see your faces on this, because I can pretend I'm talking to each one of you. Changing the layouts of the rooms and changing the camera angles and the cameras that they're using. Because in TAFE, more of the teaching happens when you're having a discussion. So having a camera at the back and having a teacher at the front, like a lecture, it's not rich for the students. So we try to get them to have conversations within the classes. Making sure that they're speaking up with their head held high, that the microphone, the audio quality is good, that they're not talking downwards or upwards, and that they're not doing little things inside the class, like having a little conversation with a student that's at the local end, and all the other students that are dotted all around the place feel like they're left out. And of course, making sure that, like Alyssa said, that you use activities that keep the students interested. They don't want to sit through 6 hours of watching you speak. And I thank you for watching me speak for this long. But what about the students? That is why we're in education, for the students. It's not for the teachers. It's not for the tech guys. It's not for the managers. We're here for the students. So what we do in our mentoring program is, once we're comfortable that the teacher is comfortable, we'll go to a remote site if it's possible, and we'll sit in the class with the students. We'll watch the students. We'll see how they react to different activities. We'll see when they're really engaged in the conversation or the learning or the activity. You see if they smile, if they wander and drift off and don't pay attention. You take notice of all those things. Are they not distracted? Do they look comfortable? What are they saying? What are the students saying? Oh, I don't like this. I like this. This is great. And believe it or not, the students do speak like that. And that is really important. And sometimes in our case, the students need to develop technical skills to help. We've got to make sure we have good guides for the students too, because they could be running the technology. And in the case of COVID, the platforms and the systems, they're at home by themselves without any support or very little support. You've got to support the students to be successful. And usually in those classes that you've got, we use Cisco video conferencing, which is really great. We will find a student that's really, really good, and we'll make them kind of the technical lead, and they'll do the things that they need to do at the end if something goes wrong. And we think that not only are we giving them the skills to do their chosen course and their chosen career, but we're giving them digital skills that they need to exist in the world as we know it and the world as it's going to be. And that we owe it to our students to make sure that we give them those skills that are going to complement their career as well as what they're doing internally. So you should do a survey, and I do these of the teachers and I do them of the students at the end of each session. Just 5. What did you like? Ask them what they liked about it. And a lot of the students would say, I liked it when she was asking us questions and we had a discussion. And we have some of these cameras in our rooms that they go and find the person talking and they bring them up on the screen. And then they pull back to the whole room. And then if there's 2 people, it will put the 2 people on the screen. So you can have this classroom over here and this one over here, you can have that student there and that student there almost talking face to face. And when they're doing that, they're so engaged and they're talking across the campuses. And I watched quite a lot of friendships form between our students when they were having breaks and they were talking to the other rooms and the other students openly. But then there's always, what didn't you like? What was bad for you? What didn't you enjoy? From those two questions, what would you like to see more of? So of course, students want to see more of the things they liked, or there might be some things they'd like to see that weren't in the course. More discussion, less talking, less presenting, more interaction. What would you like to see less of? And then ask them for their suggestions. And that's great for your teachers and great for the students. And you can keep developing the learning that you're doing. You can develop your delivery program. We used all that feedback to really refine the technology that we use and to make it really, really intuitive and almost not there. Our students actually said to us, we don't need the teacher to come to visit us anymore because we feel like she's really here anyway. And that's a great outcome. You must absolutely give feedback. Totally, all the time. Help teachers out. So you just need to tell them what they did really well, support them, and be there for them, and tell them what they did really great, and they will keep doing it all the time. But one person can't do all of this, and COVID showed, similar to Alyssa, that we only had about a week to get our entire business skilled up and off our sites, and our students too. So you can't do it all, but you can see that our program that we put in place, working with our teachers, has created some really amazing technical champions. So we really relied on this network before COVID, and especially during and where we are right now with COVID. We really need these people to help us get the message out and to get the training out and the skills. So, I might have trained 10 really great teachers, and they might have trained 5 teachers themselves, and they might have trained 5 teachers. And next thing you know, you've got 430 staff, all upskilled, all using technology, all using platforms, all doing amazing things they didn't think that they were going to do, and and being really proud of them for the journey they took. So find those people that are really energetic, really positive, really believe in what you're doing, and they can train their peers with your help. They exchange ideas that you haven't thought of. As a teacher, I've got a pretty good set of skills, of teaching skills. However, other teachers have got another set and another set, and next thing, they're all talking to each other, and they're getting more and more tools to deliver their classes better and more fun. And they create new ways to do it, and they take it to the next level. They now use the technology in ways that it's far superior to what I can do, and far more comfortable and in far more situations. And after you drive your staff, they will drive you back. They will call you up, they will send you an email and say, this is really cool, but I really want to do something else. Can we do it? And it's your job to find out if you can. So all this has had big gains for us, but we've got really far down the track. We can use lots of small groups to make bigger groups. And in the case of COVID, we can keep teaching. Through 2020, not only did we meet the same level of students trained, the same target as 2019, we went above. We actually increased our training and our training revenue because the engagement. We had less people drop out of their courses because some of them were really, really scared when COVID happened, and they didn't want to come to a big campus because they thought they might be exposed. So we had them joining in from home. So we started a little bit of a migration into blended learning before things got really bad. The other cool thing is that we don't have really qualified specialist teachers in all of our sites. We don't have a lot of people here. So this has enabled our teachers to go across our whole organisation, and our teachers can be located anywhere, and our students can be invited. It can be anywhere now. And in one instance, we have a beauty course that is about nails, fingernails, and nail technology. I'm a boy. I'm not really great at this stuff, but we were able to have an industry professional teach our students from Perth, which is 3,280 kilometres away, teach a specialist session to our students over here in Warrnambool. And that was amazing. We were able to we had an amazing makeup teacher who was only available one night a week, but her course needed to be taught 2 nights a week. So she would do all her practical on the site one night a week, and then she would do all her delivery on another night from home with her child at home. And her classes were really interactive and really great and really fantastic. Was one of the best experiences I've ever seen in delivery, to be honest. And it was something that you wouldn't expect that you would deliver over technology. So there are so many gains to be had when you do this. But there's also challenges that no doubt you're facing. And that is, until COVID, people didn't think it was necessary to be able to deliver other courses in this way. So we only had about 15 programs that we were delivering, but they were doing really good things for us. You know, our students wanted to keep learning during COVID, and they didn't want to come on campus. We had to do something about that. Of course, as I said before, our teachers are challenging us as technical experts and education experts now. So we have to keep inventing ourselves, keep going out and getting new skills, working with our teachers and staying connected to them to learn from them so that we can keep getting those across. So we have little things where we pair teachers up across different teaching teams and different subjects, and they exchange ideas. So your teachers use this to keep evolving and to keep coming up with new skills and to keep their students engaged. And a lot of the time, and Alyssa, again, it's really great to hear that other organisations share the same journey, is that most of the time your teachers will say, oh, my students can't do this, or they can't connect, or they won't learn. That's usually just the teacher being scared. So once COVID hit and they could no longer say no, the students were so happy to be given that option. And the teachers had to face their fears and become, you know, educators in this new mode, in this new century. So what were my key takeouts for this and for doing anything with technology? You must have a clear vision in the organization about what you want to do. You have to workshop that with your key people that you need to get on board with your vision. And you need to have some people at those levels that are teachers that are going to be okay. So you get that support, and then that will drive itself. And we found that once we got the support of our staff and the vision, that more people wanted to come on board and try it out. You need to start small and really focus on doing it right. If teachers have a positive experience, they will really push the growth. If your staff in your organization have a positive experience, they will drive it, and they will tell other people, and they will keep getting on board so they can have influence. But this is technology, and this is the world we're in now. There will be failures. Things will go wrong. Have backups. How am I going to do this if this goes wrong? And for us, we have a really quick way of swinging our students over to a different platform if we have a technical failure or a platform failure. There are so many ways to do things like that. You need to be there for the students and the staff. You can't leave them alone for too much, especially early on in the piece. They'll become really self-sufficient in a really quick time. But for me, I always make sure I have the phone on, just in case something does go wrong at 8:30 at night. Have great documentation. It's quick and easy. Always check in. You really, really, really always need to check in with those people that are using this. And most importantly, you really have to have strong partnerships. For us, we've been working with Cisco systems for a long time, but in this space, we've really worked with Cisco in feeding back about what we would like to see in their systems that would make them better suited for education. And they have always obliged by helping us out and by redefining things and by giving us trial technology, by having us along to some of their really big get-togethers where they discuss stuff like that. So I absolutely couldn't be here without Cisco support, but you could use Zoom or you could use Teams, but WebEx for us and Cisco, it covers everything from our video conferencing rooms and our meeting rooms to our spaces that have got TVs and cameras in them, to our portable units, and that all links in with like the Zoom app. It's got an app that connects to it and the students can connect, and it connects to all of our chat. So teachers can have chat rooms that join to their class. And so we've got a full suite of tools now that keep our students engaged every single way possible. So they can work together in the chat space. The teacher can push a button and call a video conference at any time. The recordings from that, as Alyssa said, recordings are just an amazing outcome of COVID, but they get downloaded into the space with the students. There's such a great, I couldn't speak highly enough of the work we've done with Cisco and their partners that have helped us integrate over the journey. I'll leave it on that because there's quite I could speak for forever on all this, but I've really enjoyed having the opportunity to present. So thank you. I'll turn it back over to Lyndall.
Thank you very much, Michael. That was a really interesting presentation, and thank you for sharing all of those specific examples as well. I wish I could have had some of your teacher training before I had to facilitate this webinar, but hopefully I've mastered the mute button now. So anyway, thank you very much for that. I'm hoping to pass the floor now to Liha from the Embassy. I'm hoping that we've got some questions in the chat box for our speakers. Liha, if you know, it would be useful if you could tell which speaker the question is directed to. And also just a reminder that we're trying to focus on today's topic, which is organisational transformation, and that we do have future topics to ask questions on in the weeks to follow. So Liha, is it okay if I hand over to you to field some questions for our speakers?
Cảm ơn Lyndall. Thưa quý vị, chúng ta sẽ có 30 phút cho phần trả lời câu hỏi và thảo luận này. Trước hết ban tổ chức sẽ bắt đầu với những câu hỏi mà chúng tôi nhận được trong hộp mà chat. Sau đó nếu chúng ta còn thời gian thì quý vị có thể đặt câu hỏi trực tiếp. Câu hỏi đầu tiên liên quan đến việc thực hành trong giáo dục nghề nghiệp. Chúng ta đều biết là thực hành là một phần rất là quan trọng trong giáo dục nghề nghiệp. Và tôi muốn hỏi hai diễn giả và mong hai diễn giả chia sẻ kinh nghiệm về việc là ở Úc và ở các trường của hai diễn giả thì việc giúp sinh viên thực hành, hướng dẫn trong quá trình học trực tuyến như thế nào? Hướng dẫn sinh viên thực hành.
So Alyssa and Michael, did you hear that question? Yep.
Yes, yep. I'll jump in first. I can't see Alyssa on the screen. Yes, look, practical is very, very important in vocational education and training, and that's what makes vocational education and training so unique and so amazing. For us, there are things that can't be done on a computer. There are things that can't be completely replaced, and we wouldn't want to, because that would take away the experience to the student. So we try to make sure that in the design of the program that we go through the what needs to be taught, and we sort of go, how are we going to teach that? So it's like a matrix. Okay, I've got to teach that skill or that piece. It's theory, and I can use these ways of doing it. But when it comes to having to get the student to do something, if they are based in the workplace, then we're able to have them practice that in the workplace under supervision, then that's fantastic. But if they don't have a workplace and they're an apprentice, then COVID has given us the ability to bring them on site But in general, we would get them to a site that they need to come to in an intensive way. And we would teach those skills in an intensive block. And then they might only do those blocks once every month or once every 6 weeks. And they'll go back and they'll undertake their learning back in another mode, all of that stuff they can do. And then they'll come in and they'll use that learning in a practical again. So we don't ever replace it. And in some cases, some things that we do teach, we have portable trailers that go on the cars, and our trainer and assessor is able to drive to the different sites and undertake the practical training.
Thank you. Alyssa, did you want to?
Yeah, sure.
As well?
Yeah, no worries. I guess my response would be very similar to Michael's. I completely agree that practical is what makes TAFE or vocational education so valuable. It is what we do, it's our bread and butter, and we would never want to remove that. And there are many, many things that we just could not do remotely. I often give the example of our certificate 2 in electrical, so pre-apprenticeship programs. You know, one thing I would never do is say, go rewire your house and let's see what happens. Not only is that, you know, incredibly, incredibly dangerous, but, you know, I don't think that's quite what they're after. They need guidance. They need to be able to do these things with supervision. And there is a lot of programs we run that use machinery and equipment that's incredibly expensive. We teach people how to use CNC machines. They're $500,000 machines. I doubt our students have those in their backyard, and they need to be able to practice on that equipment. However, we did have some really creative examples of people practicing, say, the programming elements on a simulated piece of software, or some of those where they could take a component of that learning and bring that into a simulated environment. During our COVID, I know some of our myotherapy students, for example, were able to practice a few parts of what they'd been learning on family members, friends, and things at home, even though they didn't necessarily have the exact amount of equipment and all that needed. They could adapt some of those activities. Our surveyors were out in their local parks, and there was a lot of different ways that we kind of were able to adapt components of that learning, and then using video tutorials and some of those so students could see what was meant to happen in an industry, practice their components of it, which then prepared them so when they did come in to do some of that practical activity on campus using the equipment or in the workplace, they had some understanding, they had some basic skill that then they could apply. So that meant that they could transition a little bit more rapidly. And because we had shorter numbers, as Michael was saying earlier, because of COVID and social distancing, it meant that perhaps they had a different teacher to student ratio, so they could use that practical learning and then really hone in on the actual skills that they were learning much more rapidly and get really great results doing things that way. But not everything can be replaced, and we wouldn't want to.
Thanks, Alyssa. Back to you, Leha.
Cảm ơn. Câu hỏi tiếp theo, cảm ơn phần chia sẻ rất là ý nghĩa và bổ ích của hai diễn giả. Và chúng tôi xin đặt câu hỏi tiếp theo đối với cả hai diễn giả. Đấy là khi có quá nhiều sự thay đổi như hiện nay, thì trường của hai vị đã có những chính sách hay những cái tác động như thế nào đến đội ngũ giảng viên, nhân viên để đội ngũ này cùng với nhà trường nâng cao chất lượng đào tạo?
I'll jump in, and if I haven't quite understood the question, please let me know. But I think one of the things that I was talking about earlier was the online learning guidelines. So we set some benchmarks around the quality of what we wanted. And then part of that, we already had some pre-existing benchmarks. So these were really just an addition. So we have some requirements in any of our digital course that all teachers have to meet, which includes in providing information to students around where to get support, how to contact their teachers, and some of those things, so that if there are changes happening very rapidly, the students can ask for help and they know where to go for help. And we have Student Connect, which is our central department too, which people can contact via phone or email. So they then guide the students through that. So I think those benchmarks around the quality helped with the transition around rapid change, and made it a lot clearer. And we have very strong communication policies. So whenever a change happens, the university is very, very quick and adept at making sure those changes are being communicated to students through a variety of avenues, so that they know if they're coming on campus, not coming on campus, and where to find that information. I'm not 100% sure if I've answered correctly what you were looking for, but hopefully that gives you a bit of insight.
Yeah, I'm a little with Alyssa. I'm not quite sure what the question is about the changes. I mean, there are always changes in what we do. They can be compliance changes or funding changes, or when we're using technology changes. So I think all of them can be addressed a little bit differently. Obviously, we do have policies around our online content and how that's developed, and that's got to go to a standard. And we have an instructional designer on staff that handles the quality, getting them up there. We have an education quality partners team that will work through the compliance framework to make sure that the courses are in line, and that what goes to the learning designer, instructional designer, actually is correct, so that what goes online is there. The same thing when we're working with teachers in virtual classrooms, that the same policies around quality are there. Then if we're looking at using platforms, and you said features, which was a standout, we have to make sure that our documentation is really quick to change when there's a change in features, and we get that out. So for students, similar to what Alyssa said, we have a student hub, or an area they can go to get the supporting documentation that's up to date at any given time. Again, we have policies around recording classes and all those things that you need to make sure that you've got the best interest of the student and all of our requirements taken care of, and that you can adapt quick to changes.
Thanks, Michael and Alyssa. Back to you, Leha.
Không biết là chị Trúc Phương, người đặt câu hỏi vừa rồi, đã hài lòng với những cái phần trả lời của hai diễn giả hay chưa? Hoặc là nếu mà chị muốn hỏi thêm hoặc làm rõ thêm cái ý của mình thì xin mời chị.
Dạ, cảm ơn chị Lệ Hằng ạ. Ý ở đây là cái câu hỏi của em là quá nhiều sự thay đổi rồi, những cái chính sách cho giảng viên, ví dụ như là quy định về số giờ lên lớp hay gì đó, thì giữa cái hình thức trực tuyến với lại trực tiếp thì có nghĩa là cái chính sách của cái chế độ cho cái giảng viên thì nó có khác gì không, để mà động viên họ có như là vừa phải cập nhật học tập những cái phương pháp để mà khi mà chuyển sang hình thức trực tuyến đó chị. Dạ, em cái ý em hỏi là hỏi như vậy ạ. Dạ, em cảm ơn ạ.
Rồi, cảm ơn chị Phương. Xin mời phiên dịch sẽ dịch lại để cho các hai diễn giả được biết ạ.
I'll jump in on this one to begin with. Essentially, there haven't been any changes to our the framework that our teachers are employed under, and they do have a number of things built into those teaching hours. So as well as teaching hours, they have different hours for planning and other pieces of work. So we were very conscious, although there was that initial week that I was talking about where we had a rapid transition and there was a period where there was some rapid work, then we were really, really conscious to make sure that we were still working within what our teachers' hours should be, and that we weren't putting extra strain on the teachers. So I remember speaking to some of my teachers and saying, just because you're working online doesn't mean you need to be online 24/7. You don't need to be answering calls outside of hours. So what we recommended our teachers do is to really be careful and structured around setting times that they were available to students and thinking about how they use their scheduled class hours to make themselves available for students, and also setting some real clear guidance to their students up front to say, if you contact me, these are my office hours, I will respond within this amount of time. Most of our students were very open about that and very forgiving, knowing that our teachers were also dealing with the pandemic, and that's a reasonable expectation of a teacher, and it's not different really to what we would have done face to face. We don't expect our teachers to be available all the time to our students. In terms of the preparation to go online, they were very much supported, and to help them work within those hours, we made sure that we did work with teams. So they have access to us, the library supports, and a variety of supports. And we also really encouraged, and it was probably a really good outcome of COVID as well, that teachers actually started to work more holistically as teams to develop the content and to share resources, and to also share across different teams, so that it reduced some of that load. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, very similar from me too. Our teachers are employed under an agreement, and they have an allocation of time they're actively teaching. They have an allocation of time for their class preparation and correction. And they also have another allocation of time called non-attendance, where they're doing those sorts of things. I think when it comes to digital skills, we need to remember that this is 2021, and having those skills is no longer something that's you can say, I don't want to have them. So just like in any industry, I believe that once a teacher is being paid to teach, they're no longer a plumber, and that they are going to have to keep up their currency and their skills in teaching in a contemporary environment as well. So there's a little bit of expectation there, but we also repay that with good levels of support. When it comes to policies and guidelines, we have, I said, our Education Quality Partners department, which have a very highly skilled educator in them that's around the governance and the compliance. It helps them with that. We have a fantastic technical team on site, and we also have great partnerships, as I said before, with Cisco, or whether it be the companies that are called Data3 that they actually partner with us directly around that. So we make sure that the partnerships exist inside and outside to help them get those skills. But we also have to expect that they're going to develop those skills, because this is what the world is going to be like.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks, Alyssa. Back to you, Liha.
Câu hỏi tiếp theo được đặt cho diễn giả Elisa. Chúng ta đều biết và cũng đều mong muốn là ảnh hưởng của đại dịch Covid sẽ giảm dần. Và khi đó thì sinh viên có thể quay lại trường. Kế hoạch triển khai đào tạo kết hợp trực tuyến và trực tiếp của các bạn Úc như thế nào? Trong trường hợp một số học viên mong muốn tiếp tục học trực tuyến và một số khác lại mong muốn học trực tiếp, thì các bạn sẽ triển khai lớp học như thế nào?
It's a great question and very topical at the moment. At the moment, I'm not sure how much you know about Melbourne's circumstances, but we're now the most locked down city, and our COVID cases are rapidly increasing. So there definitely have been some people who aren't keen to go on campus. I think we need to look at it case by case. Unfortunately, with such a diversity of programs and offerings, there's not ever going to be a one size fits all model. And some of our courses lend themselves really well to an online environment and to students being able to stay in that remote learning environment, but some of them don't. And there's some programs where unless a student can come on campus at some point, they're not going to be able to meet the requirements of those courses. So we need to look at how we can support students to have the flexibility in a blended learning model around some of the parts that can be built in that way. So potentially some of the online learning parts or the class parts that can be recorded, repeated, flexible. Students can watch at different times, activities that students can complete on the job in their workplaces, or variety of ways to present that content. But there will be some cases where, unless the student is able to attend campus at some point in time, they're not going to be able to complete those assessment requirements that are needed and get through the course. And that's just an unfortunate reality of the nature of TAFE programs.
Thanks, Alyssa.
Câu hỏi tiếp theo đặt cho cả hai diễn giả. Đấy là chúng ta đều biết là cái việc thu hút người học để họ tích cực và tham gia vào cái bài học trực tuyến là rất là khó, và cũng là cái mấu chốt quan trọng để chúng ta có thể thành công với việc học trực tuyến. Thì tôi mong muốn hai diễn giả chia sẻ một số những cái công cụ hoặc là một số những cái hoạt động hỗ trợ để cái lớp học trực tuyến nó thu hút sinh viên hơn. Ở Việt Nam thì chúng tôi có bài giảng PowerPoint. Thế còn bên cạnh đấy thì ở Úc, các vị có những cái công cụ hoặc những cái hoạt động hỗ trợ nào để chúng ta có thể gắn kết và tạo sự hứng thú cho sinh viên hơn trong quá trình học online?
Yeah, I think Alyssa and I both spoke about designing the program from the very base layer. And PowerPoints are great. They're a good tool, but they're not very engaging. So I think the first part of the question is attracting students is difficult. If you do this well, I think that you might not attract the same students that you will get in a classroom, but you might attract new students that probably wouldn't study with you because they want to study online or virtually. So, and that sort of goes into the last question a little bit, that it isn't for everyone. But when you're looking at designing your learning and you've got PowerPoints, and what else do you use? Well, I don't recommend spending too much time just having a PowerPoint on the screen and talking at people. So everything Alyssa and I did in this presentation, don't do that as a teacher. Totally don't do that as a teacher. That's not going to be very good. But just like what we're doing here, the conversations are the most important way of learning and giving information. So instead of just having PowerPoints, I think you need to make sure that your learning stops and it has very human aspects in it, because humans crave to engage. So you need that in your learning. So if you must use PowerPoint, don't use it for long. You have discussions where the students are talking amongst each other, have discussions with you, have polls and have breakout rooms and activities. In one of my classes that I was mentoring, it was for early childhood, they were painting and they were doing things. So they just took some time away from the camera, did some stuff, then they had to explain their art to the other participants. So that's where I'm at. PowerPoint, don't use it much, please.
I would agree. I think, you know, I love that, Michael, that what we're doing right now is not best practice in terms of what we're trying to push in terms of the engagement model. But definitely thinking about what types of learning activities are going to help the student prepare for their assessment tasks, what kind of work they're going to in the future, and thinking about ways that we can get them practicing those skills. So whether it's about engaging in conversations, having, you know, small group activities, researching, bringing things back. I'm a really big believer in letting the students also co-create some of the content and actually getting them to be the ones that present the content. If I'm teaching, I actually take a back seat. I might ask a few questions and set a few tasks, but generally the students will create and present the bulk of the content. We also trialed and used a lot of free apps. There are heaps out there, Mentimeter, Kahoot, Flipgrid, some of those. Flipgrid was one that was really popular in a lot of our learning because students could take their own videos and then post them and comment on each other's videos and share them. And it has that social media feel, which students feel very, very comfortable in because it's an environment or a type of platform that they're really used to engaging with each other in. And those were really successful ways to get students talking. We had a lot of debate from our teachers around, I need my students to turn their cameras on, and this became a really big topic of conversation, that students had to have their cameras on. And I kept saying, well, why? If they're presenting work or they're uploading work or they're posting a video and they're doing those sorts of things, then perhaps they are engaging. Maybe we need to think more about how we're engaging them. Perhaps their camera's off because they're actually in their bedroom and the bed's unmade and mum's in the background, or there might be other reasons. So they're the sorts of tools that I would consider using, and just really thinking about those learning activities that get them practicing, engaging and talking to each other.
Thank you. I also just wanted to remind participants that
chị Leader ơi, hiện nay là chúng ta có 2 câu hỏi trong hộp chat và tôi đang thấy có 2 người giơ tay, thì chúng ta
sure,
chắc
sorry.
là cân nhắc thời gian.
Sorry, Leha, could I just say, I just wanted to let participants know that we will have a session next week on the design and production of learning material suitable for online TVET. And then a couple of weeks later, we have one session dedicated to how to support and engage students in an online environment. So hopefully we can delve down more into the detail of those questions in future sessions. Thank you, over to you.
Vâng, tôi xin đọc câu hỏi tiếp theo. Câu hỏi này là về vấn đề tài chính, ngân sách. Thì hai vị diễn giả nếu mà thấy một phần nào đấy của câu hỏi không liên quan lắm thì có thể chỉ trả lời phần còn lại. Câu hỏi này là để tạo được phòng thực hành thực tế ảo trong dạy học online đòi hỏi mất rất nhiều thời gian và ngân sách. Thì không biết là ở Úc hoặc là ở trường của các bạn thì ngân sách đó các bạn được lấy từ đâu để mình đầu tư cho những cái phòng đắt đỏ này, và trường các bạn thì có cần phải tăng học phí không? Để làm được cái việc này thì có phải tăng học phí không? Và câu hỏi này thì cũng hướng đến cả hai diễn giả.
I'll go first. Obviously, creating a simulation from scratch could be incredibly expensive. When I was talking earlier about simulations around, say, programming and things like that, often if you've got equipment or machinery or you use particular software as part of a course anyway, they come with tutorials that have little simulated activities and things that you can leverage onto and use. And we've also found that there's quite a number of free educational AR experiences that you can get through mobile phones, and a variety of other free materials that you can use or that you can purchase quite cheaply that we would look at first. If we were to develop a complete simulated experience, you're right, it would be incredibly expensive, and even licensing some of those simulated experiences are incredibly expensive. But I mean, I think when I think of simulation, I also just sometimes think of, you know, I was thinking more about IT courses and some of those where some of those little activities actually are available quite readily and for reasonably low cost, and allow students to practice programming or using different tools, and they're quite available already. Michael, you'll probably know more.
Yeah, it's a little similar to that. We have got some simulation software that was used, particularly in things like the electrical trades. But to be honest, we didn't, the equipment we use for example, video conferencing or those immersive things, yeah, that is expensive. And we got a grant to do that back in 2014 or something. So it was the original injection to get us started was quite significant, but we could still do it with a lot less budget. So we don't have to always have the best. You just have to have what works and what's best for the subject, I think is there. So we repurposed a lot of what we had. We tried to use, you know, the equipment that we had, and had some videos done up from the equipment. Or in the case of the big expensive stuff, we don't just use it for teaching. We use it for the business as well. So we use it for the corporate side of our organization and for the learning and teaching side. So that means that there's no big cost to the students. And some of the resources that the students purchase, some of their course materials, they will have a specialist application or an app or something with them that they have access to for the time of their study. And that is usually built into what's called the students' materials fees. So in Australia, in VET, our fees to our students are broken up into a couple of sections, and one is the tuition fee and the other is the materials or consumables for a course that the student can take away or have access to. So we try to keep those costs very, very low, because especially in our area, students that access VET sometimes are the ones that don't have as much income or as much money.
Thank you. Back to you, Liha.
Chúng ta có một câu hỏi cuối cùng ạ, và tôi hy vọng là chúng ta có thời gian để trả lời cái câu hỏi cuối cùng này. Ở cấp độ quản lý thì xin hai diễn giả có thể chia sẻ cách để trường mình đánh giá những cái bài dạy trực tuyến của giáo viên, để mình biết được là giáo viên nào dạy trực tuyến hiệu quả, giáo viên nào dạy trực tuyến không hiệu quả.
Did you want me to take first? I can go first. So in my presentation, I was talking a little bit around the quality confirmation process we ran. And what we actually did, we had a team of people who went into our online courses, and we actually spent a bit of time looking at a week in time of their learning and looking at the content, looking at the presentation, the recordings, the materials that were in there, and providing really detailed feedback into the teachers, because we already had established those benchmarks of what we expected to see in a course. And they aren't comprehensive. Sorry, they're comprehensive. They're not complex benchmarks. They're quite simple. They're things like, is the instruction to the learning activity clear? So if I was a student logging in, would I be able to understand what they did? Is there content? Is their content relevant to the topic? Is there a recording? Was there a way for the student to engage? Is there teacher contact details? So they're things that aren't hard to do. And so we would actually go in and have a look at all of those criteria and actually assess each course against them, and we assessed them on whether they met the baselines or exceeded it. And we actually found some really, really strong exemplars that we could then use as showcasing to support and to share more broadly as learnings for our other teachers. So that was how we kind of assessed the courses. We also developed a lot of communities of practice and encouraged our teachers as peers to come together to talk about their experience and to play back their experiences to them. So whenever we were sort of sharing insights, we would try and get it in a teacher's voice. I would never or rarely be the one that's sort of out there saying, this is what we're doing, this is the successes, those sorts of things. We would actually capture the stories of our teachers, film them, talk about them, publish their stories. We had a news section as well on our website. So once a week, someone from my team would meet with a teacher and interview them and have their story and some examples of what they were doing to overcome some of the hurdles that we then publish more broadly for the rest of the school to learn from. So it was very much about that shared learning experience as well.
Yeah, so I think, Alyssa, once again, like we work for the same place. Certainly, the more everyone thinks they're different, the more everyone realizes that we're the same. For us, we have everything's underpinned by a digital strategy. And that was a digital footprint document that we produced that expires at the end of this year. And we made a really big, instead of making it about technology, we made it about the business. And we were talking about the platforms and the systems, the courses, but then we talked about the two really important things, the capability and the capacity. And they really relate to the people in there. And we had a maturity matrix, and we got people that were going to go online, give themselves or their course a self-evaluation of where they're at. And that went from how the course goes to where they're at, and then how they were going to take that information to take their course to a better level of maturity and their own skills, and what courses were going online. And it was, if it's not really, hasn't got a really good foundation, a bit like the technology, it doesn't go anywhere. It gets forgotten about. But yeah, looking at the quality, it is really hard to assess the quality of what a person's instruction, I think, as a teacher. And having recently gone through becoming a high school teacher in 2014-15, I spent a significant amount of time with another couple of teachers in my room while I was teaching, telling me what went well and what didn't. And I'd been a teacher of 14 years before that in the higher ed and TAFE space. So apart from having someone come in and mentor or observe, and I think observation is a beautiful way to assess teaching. And I even think sometimes an observation from a teacher that's not in the same discipline area, the same subject area, so they can actually assess the teaching techniques, not the content, is really, really valuable. And just like Alyssa, you know, if there's recordings available, I think that should be something that you should audit and look back on. And you know, you see in my background, there's a lot of guitars here, and one of those things we do after I play is you go back and listen to the recording and work out what you did well and what you didn't do well, to continuously improve your own practice.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks, Alyssa.
Chị Linda ơi, hiện nay tôi đang nhìn thấy có một cánh tay giơ lên để xin đặt câu hỏi, tham gia vào phần thảo luận. Thì chị có nghĩ là chúng ta còn thời gian để cho anh Tài có thể đặt câu hỏi không, hay là chúng ta xin kết thúc ở đây ạ?
I think we have time for one last question. If we keep it brief.
Mời thầy Tài ạ. Thầy Tài đến từ trường cao đẳng kinh tế.
So okay, I can talk in English. So that okay? Could you hear me? So I'm Tài from I'm in College of Foreign Economic Relations. I have two small questions. The first one, that is because that also my problem. That is we offer the online training, online teaching to students from pandemic started. So they and also all assignments and also final examination was conducted online. So that okay, after assignment and also the final examination, they submitted all soft copies. So that okay, I think that's according to regulation. Somewhere that is soft copy have not been accepted here. So that later on they have to submit hard copy. So that we will face a big problem with hard copy management. So that please just share your experience, whether in your educational institution manage and also accepted soft copy or not, and also later on they don't have to submit hard copy. So that please just share your experience in managing this material submission from students. Thanks. How did you do in your educational institution? Yeah.
I think that one's probably a little closer to Alyssa than it is to me.
Yeah. I can take that one. Assessment integrity is something that obviously is of the utmost importance to us, but it's also, we're not like everyone else without challenges, particularly being a dual sector. There's a lot there. Our university actually made quite a big decision to not do examinations in the way that it had done in the past during the pandemic. So where we'd had the big examination halls and all of that, we didn't do that anymore. Being vocational education, we tend to lend ourselves more towards authentic assessment. So where we can do more of that practical observing, actually seeing students do work, we would aim for that. However, we do use our LMS for assessments, and we do use the quiz functionality in the LMS. Our system here in Australia is very heavily regulated around assessment and the quality of our assessments, and we get audited on the evidence that's submitted and the types of assessments that we conduct. So there is a lot of rigor around it. For me, it comes down to the way those assessments are designed more than the submission. So if we're asking questions and doing some sort of knowledge-based type questioning, answering type of thing, I would be looking into how the questions were structured, you know, whether they were using multiple choice true false type questions or whether it was a short answer type question, and how well they actually captured the evidence. And then we do use tools like, you know, for assignments like Turnitin and some of those to help check student responses to see if there has been any evidence of cheating or plagiarism. But we definitely accept answers coming directly through our LMS. And if we have any queries, we're able to then go back to a student to interrogate that answer or to have a conversation or a follow-up conversation. We have declarations in the LMS that students have to sign as part of their submission to say that it is their own work. We did have some more examination style activities that occurred during COVID, where we actually had, I think in some instances, we had the teacher actually observing the class via Microsoft Teams or some of those tools while they undertook those assessments remotely, and then had the submission come in while they were still sort of being observed in a virtual environment. So it really depended a little bit on the requirements. But our expectation as a university is that the assessments are submitted through the LMS, because then we've got them all centrally stored and it's a lot easier for us to manage. And we have a lot of quality checks and rigors in place around the design of those assessments in the first place to try and overcome some of those challenges. So hopefully that helps you. I'm not quite sure if it's exactly what you were looking for. A long-winded answer, sorry.
Okay, again, guess, Sam. Okay, thanks. Yeah.
We do also have a session on how to assess skills through online learning. So hopefully we can cover some of that as well in that session. But I think it's time to conclude today's session now. Thank you very much to our two speakers, Michael and Alyssa. Thank you for your time. They are really useful and interesting presentations. I'd also like to thank all of the TVET officers and all of the leaders and trainers from Vietnamese colleges. We thank you for your time, and we hope that you found today's session useful. Please join us again next week, and thank you, and we'll see you all soon.